You are listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and today I am going to talk about two types of insecure attachment. If the subject of attachment is new to you, please go back, way back to season one, and listen to episode 5, where I give an introduction to attachment science and I explain why attachment is so important, particularly for people who have a history of trauma. I am going to focus today on explaining avoidant attachment and ambivalent attachment. But first, a brief introduction. Each of us is created in the image of a triune God, a we and not an I. You are created in the image of a we. Perhaps a more helpful name for the Trinity is the relationship. You and I are created in the image of the relationship. Capital T, capital R, the relationship. Now, what does this mean practically? It means that you are built for connection with others. It's hardwired into your very being. Your brain and body are intended to be in deep connection with other brains and other bodies. And deep connection is simply another way of saying attachment. What exactly is attachment? Attachment refers to the way in which you connect with other people. It's the emotional bond that you develop with the people you are closest to, the people who are there for you, who truly know you. If your primary caregivers, when you were growing up, if your primary caregivers were sufficiently attuned, responsive, and engaged with you as a child, you developed what is called a secure attachment. However, many people, myself included, are insecurely attached, which means that your brain, my brain, the brains of those of us who are insecurely attached, they are different than the brain of a securely attached person. Now, your attachment style is so very, very important, perhaps more important than you may realize. Your attachment style refers to the particular way your brain has been shaped and primed to experience relationships now, in the present. And there are two primary types of insecure attachment: avoidant attachment and ambivalent attachment. First, I want to talk about avoidant attachment. When your caregiver is often unavailable or dismissive or rejecting, you will develop an avoidant attachment style. Attachment is fundamentally about feeling like your caregiver is there for you and like your caregiver is responsive to you when you feel distressed as a child. By distressed, I mean afraid, sad, mad. In the case of avoidant attachment, when the child becomes distressed, his caregiver does not provide sufficient comfort, care, and connection. Now, for ease of speaking, I'm using a male example throughout this section. However, both men and women can be avoidantly attached. I know lots of avoidantly attached women. It's just for ease of speaking. When the child tries to communicate his distress, okay, we're back to the boy. When the boy tries to communicate his distress, his attempts, in the case of avoidant attachment, have little to no effect on the parent, on the primary caregiver. So, as a result, the child is forced to try to calm himself and regulate his own emotions. The child's needs are frequently not met, and the child comes to believe, and understandably so, comes to believe that communicating his needs will have no influence on the caregiver. An avoidantly attached boy learns that it is more reliable to regulate his own anxiety as best he can than to seek comfort from his unavailable or unresponsive caregiver. The child comes to know this: mom and dad, they are either going to dismiss me, misunderstand me, or make the situation worse. So I guess I have to manage on my own. Now, it's a terrible, terrible predicament because for a child, few things are more frightening than realizing that your parent is not attuned to you or responsive to you. Eventually, in the case of avoidant attachment, the child learns that it is fruitless to rely upon others to meet his needs. Since his needs and wants rarely seem to matter to his mom, dad, caregiver, he soon stops trying to express what he needs and what he wants. Reality, for this child, reality is quite simply, I am alone and I am on my own. And as a result, the child understandably becomes deeply self reliant. He develops a view of himself as independent and strong because, after all, no one else is there to help him. This child's experience in life has proven to his nervous system, this is psychobiologically engraved in the nervous system, that others aren't available. The avoidant child does not avoid closeness to others. This is important to understand. The avoidant child, they're not avoiding closeness to others. It simply isn't a menu option for them. No one is there to attach to. No one is there to be close with. Since his caregiver has proven to be emotionally unavailable, the avoidant child loses contact with the possibility of deep emotional connection to the point of not realizing that anything important is missing. It's as if the neurological circuitry for connection is present in the child's brain, but so disconnected that it prevents the development of a robust sense of relational hopes, desires, longings. Okay, now, next section. How do you know if you are avoidantly attached when you're an adult? How do you know? As avoidantly attached children mature into adulthood, they tend, here's point number one, to feel more comfortable with relational distance and separateness. Since emotional interdependence is so foreign, they manage their emotions independently from others, on their own. They may enjoy relationships at times, but they generally only let themselves rely, truly rely on another when it is abundantly clear that the other person will actually come through for them. This is because they were forced to adapt to the utter aloneness they experienced with their parents by relying exclusively on self-soothing and self-stimulation. And so in time, for these children who become adults, in time, it became very difficult to turn to others, to reach for others. Avoidantly attached adults are allergic to emotional interdependence. It feels dangerous to need others. When a spouse offers connection or desires connection, the avoidant adult experiences some measure of fear or at times panic. The sensation is similar to a numb limb that becomes painful when circulation is restored. This, this leaves their partners feeling lonely and emotionally disconnected from them. Avoidantly attached adults may feel relieved by or even excited by brief or extended separations from their romantic partners, from their close friends. The shift for an avoidantly attached adult into auto-regulation, self-regulation, versus turning to someone else for interactive regulation. That shift is immediate and it's welcome. And it's somewhat automatic. These folks tend toward an auto-regulatory state of being. Their bodies have been trained to not require another human being for regulation. Why? Because there never was another human being there to regulate them. They like being by themselves. They tend to rely on self-stimulating activities, watching TV, watching shows, interacting with content on their smartphone, that sort of thing. And this can, as you may imagine, present a problem, particularly in close relationships. When the avoidantly attached person's autoregulatory state is interrupted by their partner or their friend, the avoidantly attached person may feel like the other person is being intrusive. All right. The avoidance rejection of their partner's approach, it's not to be cruel. The avoidant person is simply trying to stay regulated, to maintain psychobiological homeostasis on the inside. And the result of this tendency towards self-regulation is that avoidantly attached adults require little interaction and rarely provoke overt interpersonal conflict. For avoidantly attached people, emotional dysregulation often doesn't look dysregulated. This is very important to understand, and it's not intuitive. Let me say it again. For avoidantly attached folks, when they are dysregulated, they don't often look on the outside, on their face, like they are dysregulated. They may appear outwardly calm and project like an aura of being unaffected, but inwardly, they feel desperation to regulate themselves and calm the relational storm around them. Next attribute of avoidantly attached adults, they often focus on the cerebral and the analytical, avoiding the risk which is inherent in emotional connection with others. They like to keep a safe distance, in other words, from their unmet attachment longings. And again, so understandable. But as a result, they have decreased access to and awareness of their emotions, their desires. They often feel needed, but not wanted. That's so important. Avoidantly attached folks often feel needed, but never really wanted. True mutuality and inclusion are foreign to the avoidant person who believes that he is only needed and never really wanted. Next point about these folks, they will tend to recall facts about their life, such as, where they lived, where they went to elementary school, the make and model of their first car, but they will have great difficulty recalling memories of family experiences where there was authentic and genuine emotional engagement. They will often insist, especially in therapy, that the past has little to no influence on their present life. But here's the dilemma, of course. How can they know that their family experiences had no impact on them if they cannot recall those family experiences? This is an example of the narrative incoherence that plagues avoidantly attached folks. One more point. Avoidantly attached adults will tend to idealize their parents, and minimize or downplay hurtful attachment experiences. Idealizing mom and dad allows the avoidantly attached person to avoid feeling the loneliness and the emotional pain which resulted from being dismissed and or rejected by mom, dad. So that's why they downplay their hurtful attachment experiences. That's why they minimize them, and that's why they tend to idealize their caregivers. Okay, next category. What about ambivalent attachment? A child will develop an ambivalent attachment when she experiences her primary caregiver as inconsistent and at times intrusive. Those are the two key words: inconsistent slash unreliable, and at times intrusive. Now, again, I'm going to use a female example throughout this section, but both women and men can be ambivalently attached. I know lots of ambivalently attached men. I am an ambivalently attached man. All right, back to the kid. When this little girl becomes distressed, her caregiver may or may not provide soothing and comfort. It all depends on what's going on for the caregiver at that particular moment. In other words, at times, mom is very attuned and responsive to the child's needs. But at other times, she is too preoccupied by her own emotional needs to focus on meeting the child's needs. And as a result, what the child learns, by learns, I mean what becomes hardwired psychobiologically in their nervous system, is that this little girl cannot depend upon mom, cannot depend upon mom to be attuned and responsive to her, never knowing what to expect. The child develops a sense of anxiety and deep uncertainty about whether she can depend upon her mom or not. This creates, by extension, this creates a sense that others, that other people cannot be relied upon to meet this little girl's needs. The child develops, and it's understandable, again, an inner franticness as she struggles to find relief from her anxiety and from her uncertainty. Mom's inconsistency and unreliability, it may not seem like a big deal right now as you're listening to this as an adult, but for a small child or an infant, it is absolute terror. As a result of mom's inconsistency, what happens to the child? She becomes hyper focused on her mother. That is, the child attunes to mom's emotional state rather than mom attuning to the child's emotional state. The relationship becomes primarily one in which the child is responding to the parent's emotional needs rather than vice versa. This pattern of attachment essentially says this: I'm not certain whether my mother, father will be able to meet my needs, at least in any reliable way. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Which will it be today? This anxiety creates a deep sense of uncertainty that others they can't be relied upon to meet one's needs. And and whew, to make matters worse, ambivalently attached children often have at least one intrusive parent. What is intrusiveness? It refers to the parent's tendency to insert themselves into the child's world when the child is not inviting that. My mom, let me just tell you, my mom was intrusive. What is that? What did that look like? She would walk across the house and give me a hug when I didn't want or need a hug. The hug was for her, it wasn't for me. That's intrusiveness. Example number two, she would tell me things about her marriage to my dad that I didn't want to hear. That's intrusive to a 10-year-old boy. There was a season in which my dad would call home and tell my mom that he was going to miss dinner because he had to work late. And my mom would make sure that I saw her heartbreak as she angrily took out this notebook and wrote down yet another date that my dad was missing dinner, that he was late. These kinds of interactions between a parent and a child, in my case, a mother and a son, are intrusive. The child hasn't invited mom to express her frustrations with dad. It's unwanted closeness. That's another good explanation of intrusiveness. Unwanted closeness. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was very upset one day because I felt like my dad cared way more about his work than he did about me and my brothers. And I was expressing this to my mother. I was telling her how upset I was about this. And my mom responded by saying, "Honey, you don't think your father is having an affair, do you?" Now, this is intrusive. I was not inviting my mom to talk to me about her fears. The goal of intrusiveness is for the parent to get some of their adult relational needs met through the child. And the child's heart becomes bound to the intrusive parent because the child knows that mom or dad need them to be attuned, responsive, and engaged with their hurt and heartache. My mom needed me to tend to her because her husband was emotionally checked out and he was not tending to her heart. That's intrusiveness. Okay, how do you know as an adult if you are ambivalently attached? As ambivalently attached children mature into adulthood, they will tend to experience very intense emotions. And here's the key part: they will have great difficulty regulating their anxiety, their affect, their arousal. They will frequently feel an inner franticness as they struggle to find relief from their frequent anxiety. When they are in distress, ambivalently attached adults often talk really fast and erratically. They have difficulty editing what they are saying. Oh boy, do we have difficulty with that. Their speech may be hard to follow, overly emotional, exaggerated. Now, why is this why? Why? Because the ambivalently attached adult knows, like in their nervous system, that unless they dramatically express their pain, it is unlikely that another person is going to care, that the other person will respond. It's important to understand this is not a cognitive belief for the ambivalently attached adult. This is a deep, bodily based knowledge rooted in their autonomic nervous system. Their nervous system has learned that no one will respond unless they flail and like amp their emotion, their distress way up, amp it up. Next point, ambivalently attached folks will be plagued by a deep-seated fear that they are going to be rejected or abandoned, which makes it very difficult for them to trust anyone. And as a result of their fear of like abandonment, this leads, understandably, to habitually seeking closeness, which their partners often experience as clingy. Ambivalently attached folks are always asking for proof that the other person is there for them, responsive to them, cares about them. Are you there for me? Are you? Show me. Show me again. All right, you did it yesterday. Now show me again. You did it this morning? Great. I need to know it again this afternoon. Here's the point. Ambivalently attached adults are always watching for relational disruptions, ruptures. And they have a deep need for speedy resolution whenever there is relational rupture. This urgent or anxious need for repair and reconnection often pushes others away, sadly, thus creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop that others are not dependable or I'm too much. Ambivalently attached adults anticipate relational rupture. Their nervous system is primed to expect it. We look for it. The expectation of relational rupture is recorded in procedural implicit memory. And as a result, we ambivalently attached adults feel a certainty within our body that hope will always lead to disappointment. Hope will lead to disappointment. In time, we become allergic to hope. Ambivalently attached adults, next point, often feel like the dynamics of their close relationships are unfair and unjust. The core cry inside of "that's not fair" is because it wasn't fair for them growing up when their brain was learning how the world works. Ambivalently attached adults tend to remember all of the unfair things that have transpired in the relationship. And they may need to talk through all of the past wounds from their partner, from their friend, before they can make forward movement, before they can move on. Ambivalently attached folks often feel like they are too needy. Look, we know the depth of our need, and that they do not deserve to be loved in the way that they so desperately want and need to be loved. They feel like they're too needy and that they don't deserve to be loved. They suffer from self-criticism, insecurity, and a deep sense that something is wrong with them. They rely heavily on others to validate their self-worth, and so they often are seeking, approval, reassurance from others frequently. In intimate relationships, this will not come as a surprise, they will assume the role of the pursuer, the one who goes after, who initiates, who makes bids for connection. Here's the key point. Here's the key point. Your attachment style for today, your attachment style, whether it's secure, ambivalent, avoidant, profoundly affects how you experience relationships and how you express yourself in relationships. And your attachment style develops based on your relationship with your primary caregivers. So I went through ambivalent. Before that, I went through avoidant. Let me just give you a succinct summary of attachment before we end. Avoidant attachment occurs when your primary caregivers are rarely, that's the key word, rarely attuned to you and rarely responsive to your needs and wants. Ambivalent attachment occurs when your primary caregivers are sometimes attuned to you and sometimes responsive to your needs and wants. And at other times, your primary caregivers are preoccupied with their own anxiety, their own emotions, their own moods, their own trauma. That's ambivalent. And secure attachment, the key word to associate with secure is the word often. Secure attachment occurs when your primary caregivers are often attuned to you and often responsive to your needs and wants. And moreover, here, this is really important with secure attachment. When there is relational rupture between the parent and the child, the harm is quickly repaired. And as a result, the child feels seen, soothed, and safe again. Okay, that was my attempt at a succinct summary of avoidant attachment and ambivalent attachment, which are two of the forms of insecure attachment. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I will come back with a new episode in 2 weeks.